Proverbs, we've got a lot of them, don't we? Not just in the Bible, but in life. Do you know some of them? I bet you live by some of the Proverbs. Think in your head. I know I've got a few that are near and dear to me, and I wish I could give them a Bible verse. That way I could say them to my family, and they would mean something. Like cleanliness is next to godliness. That's a great proverb that is not in Scripture. Bums me out. Any others? Somebody's thinking of a proverb you grew up with. I would call on Kathy Garlow, but most of what she learned from her dad, and a lot of that can't be repeated. What's that? Not in church, yes. Yeah, I get to hear it when we're out helping kids do cross the street. So yeah, I get a lot of good ones. What are some proverbs you've heard?
Do as I say, not as I do.
That's what a preacher says. What else? A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Yeah, I'm glad I could finish that because you didn't. Yeah. Who else? I saw Lynn. I guess we're dismissed. Just like that, huh? Church is done. No, kidding. Yeah. Yes, that's such a good one. Okay, we live by these one-liners, and especially now it seems like in the age of memes and everything, TikTok videos and snippets, sound bites. We live in the age of the sound bite. And that's unfortunate, I think, because we've lost our attention span. And if it can't be said in 30 seconds, it's not worth saying. So I was thinking about this in terms of even TikTok. And somebody, I don't even know if they're here. We've got a bunch missing. But somebody wasted my time here with a TikTok video. I don't even have TikTok, and so they sent this to me, and since they wasted my time in a sound bite that was supposed to be like Proverbs and Bible and all of that stuff, I thought I would pass the favor. You get what you give is the principle for the day, so they wasted my time, so I'm going to waste yours. Here's some Proverbs from Scripture that are not found in the book of Proverbs.
Hi there, you little chicken nuggets. These are some Bible verses that you can use if someone hurts their feelings or if you just don't like them. Let's get started. If only you would shut up and let that be your wisdom. If you do so again, I will lay hands on you. You should mind your own business. You can leave. You son of a perverse and rebellious woman. Depart from me, you who are cursed. Yes, I know. Be quiet. Your navel is perfectly formed like a goblet. I know that's supposed to it's meant to be like a good thing in the context of that scripture, but I meant it in the bad way.
I don't know. Like I said, whoever it was, you wasted my time, and you get what you give. Someone else wasted my time, but this one's brilliant. You've seen those posters, motivational posters. They hang them in like break rooms, like just hang in there, and you see a cat or something hanging by its claws from the end of a rope, and you're thinking, that's not how a cat should hang by the end of a rope. But you can't say anything nice. Sorry. Okay, so they're ridiculous. They make me laugh, and they're not supposed to be funny. And I had made some comment, and so I will shout out this person because bring it on. Dusty gave me a calendar of demotivational posters. So I want to do this like kindergarten, right? So it's got the motivational picture on there, and I don't use calendars. Like, who uses calendars anymore? We still get them delivered from Smith's Mortuary every year. And I'm like, that's just good advertisement because they need to put on the calendar, this could be your year. You know. But Maybe, But here's one. The big motivational poster, compromise, meet me halfway. You need the exercise. Gratitude. Don't blame us for cutting you down. Think of us for giving you new chances for growth. Let's see. Here's a good one. Leaders. Leaders. Our burden is to take bold, dramatic actions. Should those actions fail, your burden is to suffer bold, dramatic consequences. 12 of these, which is ironic since there's 12 months to the year. Opportunity. It only looks like a tragedy from where you're sitting. Yeah, the mouse. Yeah, and then December's, I think, is my favorite, or the truth that belongs to my life. Disorganization. That's what it is. Disorganization. My life is complicated enough already without trying to introduce organization into it. That's my life. Proverbs. We live by these things. We like these things. And I don't know if we live by them, but that's kind of the point, because sometimes we mistake knowledge for wisdom. We're surrounded by sound bites. We're surrounded by posters. We're surrounded by tidbits of knowledge and lots of information. Lots of information. This is the information age. In every second, more bits of information are shared globally right now than was shared prior to 1950 in the entirety of human history. Every second. Isn't that ridiculous to even think about? And so we have all of this information at our fingertips, and somehow we have less wisdom, it seems. Wisdom. We sure like the posters and the sayings and the tidbits, and we repeat them a lot. But do we live by them? You see, information is just knowledge. It's just information. Wisdom is not information. Wisdom is information with shoes on. Wisdom is information with practice. Wisdom is information at work. That's what wisdom is. You've heard my classic example of this. I've said it too many times. Let me say it again so that you get so frustrated with me that when you finally fire me, you'll have a reason. I've given you more than one. But here's information. Information is knowing that a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom is knowing enough not to put it in a fruit salad. Right? You put your information, your knowledge into practice. This is where wisdom resides. And so it seems appropriate that there is an entire book of the Bible dedicated to wisdom. Actually, it's part of a trilogy. And I think this is important for us because while Proverbs is its own book, if we take Proverbs by itself, we could run into some big, big problems. If you read Proverbs without reading the rest of the Bible, you might get this idea in your head that life runs very much like an algorithm or like a math equation, that if you do this and this, then that will always happen. Read the Proverbs through. It seems like if you always work hard, if you get up early in the morning and you get your chores done and you are diligent with your life, then your life will end with material success. You can read that in the Proverbs. And if you're lazy, my favorite one, sluggard. I think Connie said that. I love that word. Isn't that sluggard? I'm going to use that a lot. It's my new word. It's not a new word, but I've realized my vocabulary has had that not in it, and it needs to. But my favorite one, the sluggard who puts his hand to the bowl and doesn't even have enough energy to bring it to his mouth to feed himself. Right? So the idea then is, if you read the Proverbs, that the lazy, well, they're always going to be begging bread, and the hardworking, you'll never see them begging bread, and it actually says that. But life isn't always like that. Sometimes the hard-working have life happen for no reason other than it's life. Sometimes the evil and the wicked prospers. Sometimes it's turned on its head. You see, if you take Proverbs by itself, you might walk away with a very disappointed view of God's economy in the world, how God acts in the world. And this is why I say Proverbs is part of a trilogy. It's a portion of Scripture that we call wisdom literature. And it belongs with Ecclesiastes and Job. Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Job. They go together because where Proverbs tends to say this is how life should work in principle, that's why we're examining principles. This is how life should work in principle. Generally speaking, it's the people who work hard who are not begging bread, generally speaking. But then we've got these other books that say, but yeah, there are exceptions. Job, a righteous man, a wealthy man. And in that day and age, wealth meant you had God's favor. That's how they saw it. And all of a sudden, his wealth is gone. He had a functional family. You don't hear much about functional families. We hear about dysfunctional families. His kids actually liked hanging out together. They had parties together. They seemed to be like a good family. And all of a sudden, his kids are all dead. All of them. All of them, 12. He had wealth. He had health. He had everything that Joel Osteen preaches about. He had it all. He had it all. And then it was gone. But wait, Proverbs says that this shouldn't happen. And Job's asking questions. And Job's friends even take the side of Proverbs. And they're like, yeah, all we can figure is you're to blame. You ticked God off. So Job is part of this. If you don't have Job, you've got a skewed view of Scripture. Or Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes, here's someone who got it all. He had wealth. He had women. Lots of them. Like he had his wives. That by itself is a problem. Wives. Plus he had his girlfriends. And his girlfriends outnumbered his wives. And he had power, he had authority, he had gotten everything. And if you read Proverbs, it seems like the goal of life is to end up on the top of the ladder, the top of the pinnacle, the top of the heap. He had it all, and in the midst of having it all, he says, why am I so empty? I've got everything. You see, you need Ecclesiastes to help you understand Proverbs. They all go together. So, if you misread Proverbs, you will be disappointed by faith and by God. There's a difference between a proverb and a promise. A proverb is a principle. It generally works. It looks at big data sets, they might say in an experimental setting. It looks at big data sets and it says in 80% of the given data, we found that this works well. If you keep your mouth shut, you're probably not going to get punched in the face as much. You know, that was Stephen's proverb. If you work hard, you're probably not going to starve to death. Generally speaking, it's a proverb. Not a promise. When we treat it like a promise, we set ourselves up to be hurt. I'll give you an example. You've all experienced it if you've been in the church at all. Raise a child in the way that they should go, and when they are old, they will not depart. Proverb or promise? It's a proverb. How do we know that? Well, first of all, it's in the book of Proverbs. That's like a neon sign. Number one. Number two, do we know of people who have raised their children and their children have departed? I remember in our first church, our last church in Iowa, the DS that brought us onto the district, Gary Miller, my first DS, district superintendent. He went on, he left that spot and went to pastor Fairlawn, I believe, and is now in a different season of his ministry. But right before I came, Gary and Brenda Miller's, one of their sons was, and it's his story to tell. I'm not telling the story, but one of his sons was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. He's in Fort Madison prison, 20 minutes from where my parents live. It's his story. I'm not telling the story. but I remember he came to our house right after we were installed as pastors. We were eating lunch. Abby was a year and a half years old. Tim was just born. So this has been 17, almost 18 years ago. And I said, okay, I'm a new pastor. I'm a new dad. Help me. How do I raise my kids in a pastor's home, in a church, in a town of 1,000 where there's no privacy? How do I do this? As a new parent, I didn't know. And he said one of the most disheartening things I've ever heard. Here's what I wanted him to say. I wanted him to say to me, you know, Jeff, if we could do it all over again, here's what we would have done different, because if we had done this, maybe our son wouldn't be here today. That's what I wanted him to say. So then I could take the knowledge, the information, apply it to my life in a wise way, and I could secure my kids before I messed anything up. Here's what he said, most disheartening thing I've ever heard. He said, you know, as parents, we made our mistakes, just like all parents do. He said, but for all intents and purposes, we did it right. I didn't want to hear that. Raise a child in the way that they should go, and when they are old, they will not depart. It's a proverb. It's not a promise. So preaching Proverbs is hard. You understand how it's hard because I'm so accustomed to preaching promises. But this is a book of wisdom. And wisdom is about how we apply it to our lives. So there is a wild card in this deck, and it's you. There's actually two wild cards in this deck. It's you, and it's the world. And this is the hand we're dealt. This is what we're playing with. And so wisdom, don't hear me preaching promises, hear me preaching Proverbs. And apply them in wise ways. But here's what's amazing is that wisdom, even in the passage we read today, seems to have a spirit. And it sounds very much like a Pentecost kind of experience. That if you listen to this voice of wisdom, she says, I will pour out my spirit upon you. Doesn't that sound like Joel? Doesn't that sound like Acts chapter 2 and Pentecost? Except it's the spirit of wisdom being poured upon us. And of course, we just finished James. Ask for wisdom, and God will give it. That's what it says right at the beginning. So it seems appropriate that we would come to these verses. But in order to come to the verses where wisdom is singing her song, I think we need to begin a few verses earlier. I did not read it earlier. Let me read it. It's Proverbs chapter 1, verse 7. We started in verse 20, but I want to read just verse 7 and verse 8. Here's what it says. This is not Lady Wisdom speaking. Now this is Solomon, and he's speaking as a father to a child. And he says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of, and in this instance, knowledge. But in chapter 9, it would change, and it's the what we know. The fear of the Lord is beginning of wisdom. That's kind of what we're going to go with today, because it also repeats itself throughout Scripture. You can find it in the Psalms as well. I believe Psalm 111 says, the last verse says, the beginning of the Lord, or the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It also says it in other places in Scripture. But listen to it. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. So hear, my child, your father's instruction, and do not forsake your mother's teaching. Before we deal with the principle itself, let me pull a couple of things out from this passage that are going to help us over these 4 weeks. First of all, notice, wisdom doesn't just happen. Hear, my son, hear, my child, your father's instructions. Do not forsake your mother's teaching. Wisdom is not just something that just happens. We are taught. We must learn it. Wisdom is not an accident. It has been nurtured, it's been cultured, it's been cultivated. This is why I'm still, for those of you that are readers, I'm still suggesting you read James Clear's Atomic Habits, because this is going to help shape some of these practices in your life where knowledge becomes a practical application and becomes wisdom, because wisdom is not an accident. We must be taught and it must be practiced. But it's a word earlier in that, the fear of the Lord. Now we know by now that fear is not, I'm just afraid of something. Fear is bigger than that. It's reverence. It's healthy respect. It's not distance. I think of it like, I'm not comparing God to a horse. But hang with me for the metaphor for a second, because if you're a horse rider, I'm not. I've ridden horses. I grew up around horses. I can ride a horse, but I'm not a horse rider. Some of you are like, this is part of your life. It's not. For me, it's a novelty that I pay for the next week, right? It's a novelty. Okay, but every time I come up to a horse, I realize how big those things are. They're big. We had quarter horses growing up, and even quarter horses, which by name should only be about a fourth of the size, they were huge. That was a joke, by the way. They were huge. And if you've ever sat on the back of one for the first time, you realize just how powerful those things are. And you're in control of this? Who's controlling who? Right? There's a healthy fear here. You can be friends with that horse. You can name the horse Ed. You can pat the horse, tell the horse he's a good boy. Unless he's not a boy, don't say that. That would offend the horse. And then tell him but there's hope because we live in the 21st century. But you can pat the horse's neck. You can talk to the horse. The horse can be your friend. What was the proverb about putting your hand over your mouth? The horse can be your friend, but at the same time you fear that horse. You're not afraid of the horse, but you fear the horse. You have a healthy respect. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. But there's this Hebrew word in here that caught my attention. We, of course, read it in the English, the beginning. In the Hebrew, the word is reshit. And the first time we hear that word is on the first page of Scripture, the first sentence. It's the first word, Bereshit bara Elohim. It comes with a preposition, be, reshit. Be, reshit, bara Elohim. In the beginning, God created. In the beginning, God. And here is this word. The fear of the Lord is the reshit, is the beginning of knowledge. We're to understand that wisdom belongs to God. This is what the author's telling us. It's been there from the beginning. Not like God was sitting outside of the created realm before there was a created world going, I'm wise. That's not, wisdom is practical application. It means more, and we'll see this throughout the remainder of this book of the Bible, Proverbs, that wisdom is woven into creation and through creation. It brings order out of chaos. There is a wisdom to the creation itself, a rhythm, we might say. It's there, it's part of it. It's been there from the beginning. In the beginning, wisdom. It's part of who we are. In the beginning. And then there's another word in these two verses that I read, and it comes in the next verse where the Father says, "Hear, my child, your Father's instruction. Hear, my child, with your ears, hear." That Hebrew word for hear, Shema. It's such an important word. We find that word appearing in its most elucidated form in Deuteronomy 6. It's called the Shema passage, Shema. In fact, kosher Jews recite that word and this passage the same way that Christians recite John 3:16. Shema, Shema, Shema Yisrael. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. That is to them their central text. Shema, hear. So here are our two words, reshit, in the beginning, wisdom. Wisdom is there, it's part of our life. And then hear, my child, your Father's instruction. It has divine sensibilities to it. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. And with this word Shema, here comes a threefold meaning that we need to understand if we will understand wisdom as a whole. So here's what Shema means. 3 parts. It means hear with your ears, listen, let it become part of your life, listen with your heart, and obey with your life. Hear, listen, obey. You see the movement? This is what Shema means. Hear, listen, obey. Hear, listen, obey. This is what Proverbs is all about. You can hear the words like noise. Noise. You can read the posters like one more tidbit of visual noise. You can hear the cacophony of voices around us. Everything is noise. You can hear it just like you hear your spouse when the TV's on. Right? Dana's had a cold since last Thursday. I'm counting the days. She's over the cold, but the cough is still there. Do you know how hard it is to watch TV? Pause. Are you done? Right? Yeah. It's hard. It's hard. Don't you feel bad for me? Right? We know. We hear these things all the time, but we can hear without ever listening. And this is the point. Hear, listen, obey. This is where Proverbs live. And why is this so important in the beginning? Wisdom. Why is it so important that we hear and understand Shema, hear, listen, and obey? Because when we come to this first wisdom song that was read earlier, where do we find wisdom? Crying out in the street, crying loud in the marketplace. It literally says, amongst all the noise. Crying in the gateway into the city. She's crying out. She can be heard, but her voice does not silence all of the other noise in your life. It's there. And it's about what you choose and who you choose to listen to. This is what it's about. You can't silence the rest of it. You can do things in your life that help to alleviate the noise, but you can't silence the rest of it. Think of the noise that we live in. Think of the things that we listen to. Remember, today's principle is about cause and effect. Do you know what you hear that becomes a part of your life that you listen to will become the fruit of your life? Cause and effect. Hear, listen, and obey is not just a good principle, it's also an accidental principle, which means what you're hearing, what you're listening to will become the fruit of your life. Hear, listen, and obey. So the issue is the voices that we listen to out of the chaos, the craziness of the world around us. Think of all of the voices that we hear. Turn on your radio. I've stopped listening to AM radio because I'm tired of people yelling. Tired of it as I yell as a preacher. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of callers calling in on the same echo chamber. I'm tired of it. I've almost stopped watching news altogether. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of a presidential race that hasn't even happened yet, really. Tired of it. All of the voices, all of the messages, all of the loudness in our life. What and who will you listen to? Here is the heart of the Proverbs, because Shema insists that what you get is what you give, and what you hear becomes a part of what you listen, becomes the action of your life. You get what you reap what you sow. This is the principle. So, how do we hear? How do we listen? How do we obey? Today I want to finish with just 4 things. I say just. I'm a preacher. Should be 3, so 4, whatever. But 4 things to help you figure out which voices should you listen to. Because remember, wisdom is crying out in the street. It's crying out in your life, in the marketplace. That means when you're out and about. It means when you're at work. It means the city gate. That means when you're going about life. That means where decisions are made for city councils. Wisdom is crying out in every place of our life. The issue is, how will you listen to her when everything else is so loud? And who will you listen to? And how do we know which voices are worth listening to? So, let me give you 4 principles. I'm borrowing them from someone else. Francis Collins wrote a great book, one of my heroes of the faith, as well as a phenomenal scientist. Francis Collins wrote this book, and these are his principles. So I got to give credit where credit is due. But he says the first thing when you're trying to figure out who to listen to people or voices that have integrity. Integrity. How about that in the 21st century? Integrity. What is integrity? Are they honest? Are they moral? Integrity. If they say something, can you take their word for it? Integrity. I guess the ancillary point to this would not just be listen to people who have integrity in their lives, but be a person of integrity as well. You're like, why isn't my family listening to me? Well, because you're a putz. You're a horrible husband. You're a negligent father. I mean, I'm talking about me. No. But we do this. Like, why isn't anybody listening to me? So we yell louder. Like, we're going to beat our chest and that's going to do it. No, we're just going to laugh at you. Remember wisdom saying, when calamity happens, we're going to mock? Yeah, there's nothing worse than a grown man throwing a temper tantrum. It's kind of funny. So have integrity, but listen to people with integrity. That's the first thing. Here's the second thing. Listen to people with expertise in their topic. Get on YouTube. Everybody's an expert on everything. Everything. The guy that started off as a car mechanic and now became a prophet for the church. What? Like on YouTube? It's nuts. Anything. Just because you're good at one thing does not mean you're good at everything. Listen to people that are experts in what they're experts in. If they're not an expert, don't listen to them. I mean, I'm not talking about people not having good common sense throughout the day. But come on, if we're going to deal with health things, shouldn't we talk to doctors? Right? If we're going to deal with car things, shouldn't we talk to a mechanic? I don't go to my mechanic to have heart surgery. And neither do I go to my surgeon to get good theology, though I've got surgeons with great theology. I remember my surgeon in Indianapolis, the first thing he said when he walked into the room, he said, "Pastor," he said, "I'm so glad to meet you because you know and I know that the heart is wicked and deceitful above all else." He was quoting Jeremiah. And I'm like, wait, I just need you to cut. I don't need you to preach. Listen to people that are experts in what they're experts in. If they're not an expert in what they're telling you they're an expert in, don't listen to them. They need to have integrity. They need to know what they're talking about, expertise. They need to have humility. That is, they need to know where their limits are. Have you ever met anybody who doesn't know, don't answer too quickly, who doesn't know when to shut up? Don't answer too quickly. You ever known anybody they're an expert, and then the topic shifts. We were talking about lunar landings to Buzz Aldrin. He's still alive, right? Buzz Aldrin, sorry. He's still alive. I think we were talking about that, and now we're talking about how to inflate helium balloons for the carnival. And Buzz is like, "Oh, I've got a story about that." No. This is where your expertise comes to an end. Right? There is a point. This is humility. We've got to know what we don't know. And can I say in the church, I think this is especially important. Boy, howdy. I wish I could quote some lines from 2020 that came out of the church that were misused and abused. I got so sick of the phrase faith over fear because it started meaning stupid over everything else. And it made the rest of us look stupider than everybody else. Right? There is a point. Humility. Integrity, expertise, humility. And then here's the last thing. Shared values. Now, this is huge. Maybe it should be at the top of the list, and I think it's one of the most important points. But if we put it at the top, we will ignore all the other points because of the shared values. Well, I agree with him on this thing, or I agree with her on that thing. So integrity, that doesn't matter. Expertise, who cares? They look good on TV. They sound good in my ears. Humility, well, no. I mean, nobody in the 21st century has humility. You need a class taught on humility? I'm your guy. Ask me. Right? This is the world we live in. If we begin with shared values, we will ignore everything else. And besides that, there's a warning that comes with shared values. We are especially guilty about this in the church of becoming an echo chamber. We surround ourselves with people that sound like us, that look like us, that think like us. And we refuse to move. And because of all of that, we begin to think that our way of thinking is actually the only way of thinking, and how stupid everybody else comes. Well, if they just did it this way, that's a good point to put our hands over our mouths as well. Shared values are hugely important, but they need to come at the end of this list. So here it is. How do you know who to listen to in the cacophony of voices? Ask yourself, do they have integrity? Do they know what they're talking about? Or are they just talking? We've got a lot of talkers. Are they humble? Does their knowledge know where it ends? And do they have shared values with you? This is the voice of wisdom crying out to you. Here's the question today for us is, will you listen to her? Will you listen to her? Because you can listen to all the others. It's loud, it's noisy. You can listen. But will you listen to the voice of wisdom?